Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about Pixar's latest movie, Elio. And if you've seen what critics have been saying about it, I completely agree. This movie is so good, I would argue it is probably the best Pixar movie since Coco. Yeah, this movie is that good. So let's talk about it. First off, the animation. As always, Pixar delivers. And honestly, I loved most of the characters here, especially their designs. The aliens just look so amazing, and the human characters are instantly recognizable. Though I do have a question about Elio. What do you guys think? Prior to this movie, I thought that the eye patch on Elio's eyes was because he was born with a birth defect. But now that I've seen the movie, it's just because he got a black eye and he's supposed to wear it for about 2 weeks. Definitely good for that scene where he talks about how he has battle scars, but I don't know. I just felt like it would have been a little bit better if he actually did have a birth defect and then he was still a relatable kid. I also want to mention Glorden, and I just love Glorden's design. Not only because it's super horrifying, because it's basically just a grub, but the fact that once you get used to the voice of Glorden, you start seeing that the design is actually super cute, and that's really amazing. Speaking of, let's talk about the voice cast. Honestly, I felt like they were super awesome. Not only because a lot of the line deliveries were super emotional, and of course they were just really good, but my personal favorite design had to be Grigon. I mean, his voice is just both so robotic, monstrous, and deep and low, and also fatherly and loving. It's hard to describe without seeing this movie for yourself, and I just really loved that. There's also the music for this movie, and well, I've heard a lot of praise for the music, but for me, I think it's actually kind of forgettable. That's just my opinion, but again, I have only seen this movie one time, and while I'm sure that there's definitely some great music, especially if you go and listen to the soundtrack, it just doesn't really stand out. What it does is help move the story forward, and that's really good. Speaking of, it's time to dive into the story. But before I do that, I want to give a very heavy spoiler warning. First off, it's really disappointing that this movie has the lowest box office opening weekend for a Pixar movie. That's just really sad. And that's because this movie is so good, it deserves to be seen on the big screen, and I'm going to be diving into the story very heavily in this review, so please go check out this movie because word of mouth actually saved Elemental. I'm hoping I can help contribute the same and save Elio. I don't think it has potential to be a sequel franchise or anything because it just feels like a one and done film. But again, I want this movie to be successful so that we can get more original films like this. If you don't care about spoilers, feel free to stick around. And if you've already seen the movie, welcome back. Let's talk about it. So we're introduced to Elio, a young kid who just recently lost both of his parents in an accident. We don't actually know how they died. We basically just hear that they died. Elio moves in with his Aunt Olga, who is trying her best to take care of Elio and relate to him, but he's kind of weird. And well, I'm pretty sure that he's on the autism spectrum, but that's not really confirmed. Instead, what is confirmed is that he is obsessed with space and he wants to go out there and meet aliens, especially after going to a planetary and hearing about the Golden Record, which is a real life thing where people recorded a message on a golden record and sent it up into space so that aliens could find it. Well, fast forward to 2025, and it turns out that message was actually received by an alien galactic Federation, and one kooky scientist says that we should send a message back and make first contact with aliens, but nobody else really believes him. But Elio decides to hijack the machinery and send a message anyway, because this whole time he's been trying to get abducted by aliens. He's been leaving crop circles, he's been waiting out at the beach, skipping school, and he's even tried to send the radio, and when it broke, he got into a fight, and that's how he got a black eye. But he ends up sending a message to the aliens, and it causes a massive blackout and almost gets Olga fired from her job at NASA. So Olga decides that Elio is being problematic and he needs to be sent to boarding school. And, well, unfortunately, some bullies who he actually punched earlier in the movie decide to get some revenge, and they corner him at the beach, and time has completely stopped. I don't know how the aliens have that kind of technology, but they stop everything on planet Earth with the exception of Elio, at which point they abduct him, which he still extremely wants, and he's super happy about it, which, if you ask me, is really good because, well, if you saw the original trailer for Elio back when it had a release date of 2024, he wasn't too excited about being kidnapped. I think that's actually a great change, because if you got kidnapped and abducted by aliens, you would want to go home. You wouldn't want to stay, even if it was a super fantastical, magical world. But in the final product, Elio actually wants to be abducted by aliens, so he's taken to the fantastical world, and he loves it so much that he never wants to go back to Earth, which is actually really good for his character, because it means he can actually develop later on in the movie. Unfortunately, they only have one spot left for the Galactic Federation, and there are two candidates, Elio and Lord Grygon, which in the original trailer, he's already part of the committee, but here he wants to be part of the committee because they have super advanced technology that will allow the Hylergian Empire to conquer the entire universe. Well, the Galactic Federation isn't really keen on that idea, but they're also extremely shy and pacifist peacekeepers, and, well, they don't want to conquer, so they don't let him join, but unfortunately, they need to go into hiding because Lord Grygon wants revenge on the Galactic Federation because he wants to conquer it. So they decide to send Elio back to Earth so that he isn't part of this intergalactic war, but he doesn't want to leave because it would mean going back to his lonely isolation where he has no friends and the only family he has is someone who constantly wants to keep him in check. As a reference, he has a made-up language called Elioese, which he made up with his mom and dad before they passed away, and he wants Olga to learn to understand it, but she just doesn't really want to because she wants him to be normal. And, well, he's upset, and that's the reason why he's looking for aliens. After the loss of his parents, no one on Earth actually wants him. At least that's the way he feels. And he feels like there are 5 trillion planets out there, so there's gotta be one that actually wants him. So with the Galactic Federation threatening to send him to Earth and thus back to isolation and loneliness, he decides to go to Lord Grygon directly and negotiate for peace. One part of the negotiation I love is how Grygon says he wants to join the Galactic Federation because of the cool technology, but then Elio says, why would you want to try to belong in something where it's clear that they don't want you? But then we get to the bad part. So at first, Lord Grygon asks Elio if he's a father. Elio is just a kid, but he says yes. And then he constantly belittles Lord Grygon for not keeping his own son in check. Well, Lord Grygon ends up getting so mad that he throws Elio in the dungeon. Now, if you ask me, that whole thing could have been avoided, and they could have made a peaceful negotiation if Elio had said no to being a father. But that's not how the movie went. So instead, Elio uses his device he got from the aliens, which has 3 functions. It can translate alien language, it can regulate body temperature, but he uses the 3rd function, which is adjust his gravity so he can float up to a ventilation shaft, at which point he crawls through, at which point he ends up in the Hylergian nursery, and he meets Glorden, who happens to be the son of Lord Grygon. And one thing I love is that Glorden ends up wrapping up Elio in a bunch of webs, so like a spider, it looks like he's going to eat Elio, but in actuality, it's just a swaddle like you would do with a baby to comfort them. And thus Elio, who needs to still make peace with Lord Grygon, decides to follow the advice of an instructional video and use Glorden as a bargaining chip so that he can bargain for peace. So the two of them make their way back to Elio's ship, at which point they go back to the Federation, and then they make a call to Lord Grygon saying, I have your son captive. If you do not stop your attack, we will torture him. Of course, Glorden is a willing captive, and by torture, they just mean tickle. But the threat makes it so Grygon decides not to attack, and he decides to safely land his ship so that he can come and pick up his son. But while they're waiting, Elio and Glorden get into a lot of fun and become best friends, and then they actually open up with each other, something that both of them haven't been able to do with anyone. We learn that Elio feels like a disappointment because he's so different from everyone else, and at first he thought Earth was the problem, but maybe it's just him. Well, Glorden comforts him by telling him that he's a good person and that he really likes Elio. Then Glorden talks about how his dad, being a conqueror, wants to put Glorden in a carapace, which is essentially a battle suit that has a bunch of weapons and will turn Glorden into a war machine, which Glorden doesn't really want. So when Grygon shows up with his carapace, well, Elio decides that they're not going to send Glorden in. Then Elio gets an idea. See, earlier in the movie, the aliens talk about how they think Elio is the leader of Earth. So they probe him, at which point they clone him so that they can send the clone to Earth and make it so that Earth still has its leader. For the sake of this video, I'm going to call him Clonio. Anyway, Elio checks on Clonio so that he can prove to Glorden that the clone actually works. And what's really sad is that even before this scene, Clonio is doing such a good job pretending to be Elio that he actually fools Aunt Olga, even though he's trying to be more normal, and he says that he's given up studying aliens, which is kind of sad because it means Aunt Olga doesn't really care about Elio to notice the difference between a clone and the real Elio. And when Elio sees this, he gets really sad, but then Glorden is super happy because it actually works. So they make a clone of Glorden, who I'm going to call Clorden, and they send Clorden to meet with Lord Grygon. So Clorden goes into the battlesuit carapace, and he's super happy about being a war machine, or at least he expresses happiness. And thus, Lord Grygon kills Clorden. Yeah, he knows his son well enough to the point where he knows that his son would not be excited to be a war machine. So because of that, they end up trying to find the real Glorden, and unfortunately, he's hiding in Elio's spaceship, and he accidentally says that the spaceship should go to planet Earth. And unfortunately, it goes to planet Earth and crash lands there, meaning the Hylergian army can't actually find Glorden, and thus begins a conquer of the Galactic Federation, and Lord Grygon completely takes over in an effort to find his son. He ends up forcing a mind-probing alien to read Elio's mind, and thus the truth is revealed. Elio is not the leader of Earth, and he is not even an adult. He's a child. He is not eligible to be an ambassador. So they banish him back to planet Earth. So while all that's happening, a couple of days ago, Aunt Olga received a weird alien message just before she picked up Elio from boarding school. But as Elio keeps acting weirder and weirder, like he's no longer obsessed with aliens, he's constantly doing chores, and he's just being normal, Aunt Olga feels really weird about Elio, so she takes a DNA sample from his hair, but surprisingly, the hair comes alive and moves its way back to Elio, and then they remove the eye patch and reveal that he doesn't have an eye under the patch. So Clonio confesses to everything. So Olga and Clonio go to the beach where Elio is stranded, and they try to send a radio broadcast so that the aliens will bring back the real Elio. So Elio approaches Olga, and Olga, thinking that she's talking to Clonio, just confesses her feelings about how much she misses the real Elio, how she has no idea what she's doing, and she's just lost and alone. And then she says that Clonio wouldn't understand, and Elio responds, I actually do understand. Then Olga, suspicious, reaches over and removes the eye patch, revealing that it's the real Elio, and she's happy to have her nephew back. And for the first time ever, Elio actually feels loved by his aunt, especially when he was talking to Glorden about how she gave up going to space in order to raise him. And Glorden says, wow, she must care about you a lot. So Elio says he's sorry about her missing out on the life she wanted, but she says that the only life I want is with you. Then Clonio comes back and he has some news about how the NASA base is getting a lot of activity because an alien ship has crash landed on Earth and they're now studying it. Of course, we know that this is Glorden. So Olga, Elio, and Clonio end up going to the base, and Clonio, realizing that he no longer needs to pretend to be Elio, decides to start decomposing, but then they say, hold it off, we could actually use that as a distraction to get into the base. So Clonio, pretending to be Elio, tries to get the help of the military personnel, at which point he melts in their arms. And oh my gosh, that is so horrifying, but at the same time, super funny. So Clonio dies, and Elio and Olga sneak into the spaceship where they find Glorden, but they discover that his temperature monitor is actually broken, meaning that he's freezing to death because Glorden is used to living on a super hot planet or super hot spaceship, I guess. So they steal the spaceship from the NASA base and they go into space, but then they hit a debris field, so they can't actually go to the Galactic Federation. And I really love this scene in the movie. So first, they reach out to Elio's acquaintance, who he requested a radio from, who ended up becoming one of his bullies, but he regretted it because he just wanted to scare Elio, not actually pummel and torture him like the other bullies were planning to do. So they use the radio signal to not only apologize to each other, but then they rebroadcast Olga and Elio to the kooky scientist from earlier, and he uses his advanced technology and resources to track the debris and help them navigate the field. But then they get cut off when they get out of range. But luckily, they bounce back to the other countries and continents and make it so that they receive signals from everywhere to help them get through the debris field. And that's really awesome. Anyway, once they're through the debris field, they enter hyperspace and they return to the Galactic Confederation, where Glorden is brought to Lord Grygon, at which point Grygon literally rips open his carapace, his battlesuit, destroying it so that he can swaddle Glorden and prevent him from freezing to death. I could be wrong, but I think he might be the first Hylergian in history to ever get outside of his carapace once they're put in when they come of age. And the reason? He ripped open his carapace and destroyed it so that he could save his son, proving that he is a loving father more so than he is a conqueror. And I really loved that. So once Elio and Olga get some translators, they are able to explain themselves. Then Glorden confesses that he never wanted to be a war machine, which Grygon already knew. That was the whole reason he killed Glorden. But at the end of the movie, all is forgiven, and in fact, Elio is offered the chance to become an official ambassador in the Federation, despite not being the official leader of Earth. And I really love that because Elio finally gets the chance to live out his dream among the aliens, and he finally has a place where he feels like he belongs. But then he looks at Aunt Olga and realizes that she's going to be sent back to Earth all alone, and he decides to go with her. And I really love it because the whole reason he's looking for aliens is because he feels like on Earth he never had a place where people even wanted him. Well, it was clear that Olga wanted him. He learned that during the journey, and now he wants to be there for her. So he says goodbye to the aliens, though it's not so much of a goodbye as much as a see you later. When I become an adult, I will become an ambassador. And so they send them back to planet Earth, and the film ends with a narrator talking about how, since the dawn of time, humanity has been searching for the study of life and going so far as to outer space to search for it, answering the question, are we alone? Oh, and then there's actually 2 end credit scenes. One where Elio and the human friend from earlier radio up and say hi to Glorden, which is really cute. And then the second one is just a teaser for the next Pixar movie, Hoppers, which I honestly have no idea what that movie is even about. So, with that out of the way, that is the entire film wrapped up. And honestly, I really enjoyed this movie, not only because it related so much, because it dives into the topic of loneliness and how even when you are surrounded by people who love you, you can sometimes feel alone. It doesn't matter who you are. Every single person on Earth is looking for a place where they feel like they belong. That is why this movie is so relatable, and it's also extremely good with its writing. Its pacing could have been a bit better, mostly because the movie could have fleshed out the aliens a bit more, but aside from that, I think that this movie was really good. It's definitely a Pixar gem if I've ever seen one. And of course, in my humble opinion, and many other critics, they think that this is the best Pixar movie since Coco, which is really saying something. But with all of that in mind, what did you guys think of this movie? Be sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. And also, if you want to help support the channel, feel free to join my membership program. Or if you want, you can just do the free option and subscribe. But above all else, make sure that you're staying safe out there, and I will see you all in the next one. Okay, bye. I love you.
If Mom could see me now.
I know what you mean. I ate my mother at birth. But in moments of great success, I regret it.
That's a thing for your species?
No, just a me thing. Everyone was shocked.